Welcome back to the Godly Impact podcast. And we have been going through a series called You're in the People Business. Because whether you are a stay-at-home mom or dad, you are the CEO, you are a pastor, you are an administrator of a school, it doesn't matter what kind of business that you are running or organization that you're in, or if you are focusing on raising children, you're in the people business. And the series that we've been talking about, have been using the analogy of the 6 essential elements that we have to have for success in life, in our relationships, using the very same elements that we have to be able to exist for life on earth. That's right. There are only 6 elements, that every one of which are necessary for life on earth. And if there was some vacuum cleaner that came along and sucked even one of those elements out of earth and the earth's atmosphere, we would all croak, right? It would just be a matter of how long and how painful death would be. Fortunately, that is not something that we have to be afraid of. But the reality is that we have to be intentional about bringing these relational elements into our lives. They don't just appear the way that there are things that are here that God has designed in the earth and in the atmosphere and in the universe. We have to be intentional about these things. So what have we looked at over the last few weeks? Well, the first week we looked at the oxygen of all relationships, and that is empathy. And that is far more than just a mutual feeling of being sad for someone or having compassion for someone when they're going through a difficult time. No. Empathy is much, much bigger than that. I think of empathy as intentional withness, where you are with somebody. The idea and the practice and the commitment of we're in this together. And then we looked at the sulfur of relationships. That's not what we would say, oh, there's a sexy element for you. But sulfur is one of those elements that's necessary for life on earth. And it has long been known, going back to ancient times, for its healing powers. And every relationship will need healing at some point or another. We usually need that on an ongoing basis because it's not just the big ruptures. It's all those little tears that happen that we need to have ways to heal, the work of repair. Last week, we looked at the phosphorus of relationships. And just like phosphorus isn't found in a natural state by itself, neither are expectations. Expectations are powerful motivators, whether we recognize them or not. And I talked about the communication pyramid and how most of the time, our communication remains in the top 2 or 3 levels. We focus on what someone did or didn't do. We might talk about how we feel about that. We might also even get to the level of talking about what we did or didn't do, either to explain ourselves, to justify ourselves, or to take responsibility for our contribution to whatever the issue was, the problem was. But we very seldom get to that base level of communication, and that is the level of expectations. And there's a variety of different reasons why we don't get there, but that is so important because expectations tell us what we really truly believe about our rights and our responsibilities and about other people's rights and responsibilities. So what are we going to look at today? Well, today we're going to look at the hydrogen of relationships. Hydrogen is the lightest and it's the most abundant chemical element in the universe. And when you take 2 hydrogen molecules and you join them with 1 oxygen molecule, you get an entirely new substance called water, right? Just from early grade school, what do we learn? We learn H2O, 2 hydrogen molecules with 1 oxygen molecule, and we have this entirely new substance. And you know what? It's also the substance that we cannot live without. So we need hydrogen and we need oxygen in this world, not just in the form of water, but that's one of the ways in which we rely on both hydrogen and oxygen. Now, Hydrogen doesn't just stick around waiting for some oxygen molecules to be able to pair up with so that water can be formed. No, hydrogen also is what fuels the stars and the sun through nuclear fusion. And the sun's maybe just a little bit necessary for us for life on Earth. So hydrogen has more than one role in our existence here on Earth and in our solar system. And so it also has this incredible power. I mean, nuclear fusion is pretty powerful. And so what is the hydrogen that occurs in relationships? Curiosity. Now, curiosity is a trait that occurs naturally in children. And it's what motivates them to want to learn. But unfortunately, life doesn't require us to stay curious. We can lose our curiosity and still live, but we will never live successfully and in a sustainable way to the degree that is possible if we don't hang on to and nurture curiosity. Sometimes curiosity and knowledge have an inverse relationship. It either makes us realize, oh, the more that we know, the more that we want to know, or the more that we don't know. And so it inspires us and motivates us to keep learning. Or sometimes the more that we learn, the more that we think we don't need to continue learning. So curiosity is a trait that requires intentional development. Unfortunately, it's not like the weeds that just show up in your yard that grow without any effort. Yeah, curiosity is more like roses or azaleas or the tulips that you have to plant and care for. Now, curiosity can seem kind of cute. You know, you might be going, really, Steph? I get empathy, I get expectations, I get needing the work of repair. But seriously, how important is curiosity? Oh, curiosity is as important to our relationships as hydrogen is in the universe. You see, curiosity isn't just about asking questions. Fundamentally, curiosity represents a posture of humility. It is when we say, I don't know it all, and I'm not okay with that. I am going to be a learner. Curiosity and humility go hand in hand. You know, one of the things that Jesus said when he was here on earth was he talked about the importance of becoming like a little child. And there is a humility that comes with little children. When they are learning to read, for example, they don't try to act like, oh, I don't know how. I don't need to learn how to read. I already understand A and I understand B, so I'm good. No, they don't do that. They're not threatened by remaining in a posture of humility. And so we need to become like little children in the sense that we're not threatened by being in a posture of humility. True humility is not what leads to humiliation. True humility is one of the most protective postures that we can take in our lives. So it begins with the questions that we ask ourselves. Sometimes we're not really good about asking ourselves questions. But when we do, we grow our self-awareness. And self-awareness is one of the most important factors for a life of meaning and happiness and significance and relational success. There is an inverse relationship between selfishness and self-awareness. The more self-aware we are, when it comes from a posture of humility, the less likely we are to be self-absorbed and to be self-involved and selfish. The less self-aware we are, the more likely we are to be self-absorbed and selfish, and not always because we are intentionally trying to be that way. It just will come by default. So when something triggers us, when it triggers our frustration or disappointment, anger or sadness, we need to ask ourselves questions till we get to that communication level in the pyramid, that level, that base level in the communication pyramid, where we get to, what was my expectation here that was triggered? Because every time that we experience frustration or disappointment or anger, or sadness, something about our expectation has been triggered. And so we also need to ask ourselves these questions about what triggers our joy, our fulfillment, our satisfaction. Because it's not just about, we don't just want to be curious about the things that identify areas in our lives we need to work on, where character needs to be built. We also want to be able to say, what brings us joy? What brings us fulfillment? What brings us satisfaction and affirmation? Because those are things that we want to build and protect as well. So we'll only develop self-awareness to the degree that we're asking ourselves good questions and answering them, again, at that base level of the communication pyramid. Because the communication pyramid, it's not just about how we communicate with others. It's about how we communicate with ourselves. Because we are in a process of communicating with ourselves all the time. We are saying something to ourselves all the time. And so good communication always begins by learning to pay attention to what are we saying to and about ourselves. But then we don't want to just stop there with our curiosity only being about ourselves. We want to be curious about other people. You know, when it comes to knowing ourselves and being known by others, we have a push-me-pullyu relationship. It's like the animal in the Dr. Dolittle books. If you remember those, where there was an animal and it had two heads, not two heads and then a tail on the other end of the body and a back end. But no, it was rather that both ends of the body were connected to like one head on one side and one head on the other side. And it was always in the state of which way is it going? Is it going forward? Is it going backwards? Well, we can be like that. On one hand, we want to be known. We want to be deeply known. We want to know ourselves. On the other hand, we are afraid to be known, even by ourselves. Have you ever found yourself kind of getting the sense that you needed to dig a little bit deeper to understand why you were acting or reacting the way you were? And then you kind of thought, that's kind of scary. I don't think I really want to go there. So you found ways to distract yourself from yourself, right? Been there, done that. That's a temptation that all of us can face. But curiosity from a posture of humility requires tremendous courage. The courage to know ourselves, the courage to know others, the courage to be known is some of the greatest courage that a person can have. Courage isn't just about running into a building on fire and rescuing someone. Yes, obviously that's courageous. But courage shows up in our lives in more daily ways than that if we give it a place, if we allow our courage to act. So we need to have the courage to get to know others. And this means we got to step outside of our echo chambers. And that's not so we step outside long enough to be yelling at other people who are in their echo chambers. No, it's let's go visit. Let's go learn to see from other people's perspective. You know, understanding someone doesn't mean you have to agree with them. Not at all. Understanding is not synonymous with agreement. We don't have to be afraid of understanding someone when we really have security within ourselves. Someone else's differences is not a threat to us. And too often we miss the opportunity to have impact, to have godly impact, because we let fear keep us inside of our echo chambers. And we think that there's something that if we get curious about other people and their perspectives and why they think the way they do, rather than just relying on stereotypes, that somehow that's going to be threatening to us. And it's actually just the opposite. If we are afraid of understanding other people who don't agree with us, that's an indication that we don't really have the level of security that we need. We need to be digging deeper and going, why is that threatening to me? Now, just like when you take hydrogen and you mix it with oxygen, that brand new substance forms water. Well, when you take curiosity and you fuse it with empathy a new substance forms, and that is relational intimacy. You see, true intimacy doesn't happen apart from security. You will only have relational intimacy to the degree that you have relational security. You can try to force closeness, but you will never have a settled closeness unless you also have a settled security within a relationship. And you cannot have security when you are not, first of all, when you don't really know yourself, and when you don't know someone else, and when you are not willing to be known. Now, I do have to say this about the hydrogen of our relationships, about curiosity. You know, hydrogen doesn't just get mixed with molecules of oxygen in order to form water. Hydrogen can also be used and has been used to create weapons of mass destruction, like the hydrogen bomb. And unfortunately, curiosity and questions can also be used as a powerful weapon. And this is why we have to begin with that posture of empathy. What I talked about is the oxygen of all relationships in the very first episode of this series. You see, if we don't begin with a posture of empathy, of witness, then what can happen is curiosity just becomes this personal data mining that we do that then can be used to weaponize information. And so knowing this means that we need to be mindful that we don't owe everyone answers to whatever they want to ask. If there are experiences that we've had or patterns of behavior where other people have used their knowledge about us as weapons, then it's absolutely not just appropriate, it's necessary for us to put safeguards in place so that that doesn't happen. We don't just hand people knowledge about us indiscriminately so they can fuse it with their improper motives and turn around and blow us up with it. We also need to be courageously honest about why we are seeking to know someone else and to understand them. Sometimes we can get really focused on learning about somebody else because it becomes a distraction to do our own work of learning about us. Right? So we want to make sure that, am I just trying to focus on being curious about somebody else because I don't want to first be curious about myself? And this is why I talked about earlier. Curiosity first begins by being curious about ourselves. What triggers us? What drives us? What do we really believe about our rights and our responsibilities and those of other people? We also want to be courageously honest when we're seeking to know somebody else to say, are we just data mining? Are we trying to gather and stockpile information in case we need to use it as leverage someday? That's really what gossip is. Gossip is just data mining for the purpose of leverage. And that leverage might not be like blackmail. It might be a matter that it becomes leverage and that it makes us feel better about ourselves. It makes us feel more important. Like we have some knowledge that gives us a certain amount of power. So again, curiosity always begins by being courageously honest about ourselves. And so just as nitrogen is essential for life on Earth, it can also destroy life on Earth. And so the same is true for our curiosity and for asking questions. We don't want to use our curiosity in a harmful way. And I think that just a moment ago, I'm going back now, and I'm like, wait a minute. We're talking about nitrogen here, and then you were talking about hydrogen. Okay, wait a minute. So where do we get this? So let me just be clear here. So I think I said nitrogen, but I meant hydrogen, right? Hydrogen. So just as hydrogen is essential for life on Earth, it can also be used to destroy life on Earth. And so we want to be careful that we use our curiosity, our questions, our seeking to know always to protect and preserve life on Earth, not to be destructive of it. So I want to give you a challenge this week. Begin by being curious about yourself. Be courageous enough to get to that base level in the communications period. What's really motivating you? What do you really truly believe about your rights and your responsibilities? Not just in some big abstract theoretical way, but in your particular job, with your employer, with your boss, with a spouse, with a child, with your family members, with your neighbors. What do you really believe about your rights and responsibilities? And what do you really believe about the rights and responsibilities of others in those circles? And then get curious about someone close to you. Start to ask one or two deeper questions. And usually it's a good idea to begin by first sharing about you. Model the willingness to be known before you want somebody else to just open up and allow you to know them. What was life growing up, like for someone? What dreams or goals have they had that they want to accomplish in the future? Places they want to visit. Maybe they have dreams or goals that they have set aside. What are those? Are those something that they want to resurrect, or do they think now the time is gone for those? What brings them joy? And before you can ask people about their fears, their concerns, their regrets, their vulnerabilities, you first have to earn the right to share your own and to show yourself trustworthy with whatever knowledge that you already have. So you want to use the oxygen of relationships, that empathy, and the hydrogen of relationships, curiosity, to form the water of relationships, the relational security. You don't want to use curiosity to create a hydrogen bomb and blow people apart. So we have 2 more episodes in this series. You're in the people business, so stick around for those. If you haven't already, visit the website, stephaniepresents.com. You can sign up there for my weekly newsletter. And remember this, my friend, you have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. Use it for good.